using at least a ketogenic, if not a carnivore diet for people for like well over 10 years with cancer, with Crohn's, with other metabolic diseases, and they're having fantastic results. But this is becoming even this is becoming recognized in America as well. And even Cedars-Sinai has started instituting metabolic treatments for cancer as well, which includes uh, um, nutritional ketosis as a driving force in that treatment. And again, going back to the fact that this all stems from plants being toxic and plants trying to kill you. The reason I say plants are trying to kill you, it's not that they're necessarily out to get you per se. I don't think they really care one way or the other if you're around, unless they want you to go down and become fertilizer for them. But this all stems from when I was taking cancer biology 22 years ago at the University of Washington in Seattle. And we learned day one how toxic plants were. And this is something that actually we learned before that. And I remember in 7th grade biology, we learned that plants and animals were in an evolutionary arms race. Plants becoming more and more toxic, so less and less animals could eat them so they could survive and thrive. Otherwise, they go extinct. And then animals who eat plants, eating a specific plant, becoming more and more adapted to that specific plant and co-evolving with that plant to become more resistant and be able to break down those poisons into safe byproducts so that they can survive and thrive. And so if you're not in that evolutionary arms race, you're going to start losing, right? Because you're not going to have those built-in defenses against these poisons. And we were looking at this from a cancer perspective, and we were taught that just Brussels sprouts had 136 known human carcinogens in them, and mushrooms had over 100. Spinach, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, broccoli, you name it. They all had 60, 80, or over 100 known human carcinogens in them. And they were quite abundant. We know from the work of Professor Bruce Ames from Berkeley in 1989, he published a paper that actually compared the plant toxins already existing in the vegetables that we eat, comparing them to the pesticides we spray on them. Because we say, oh, well, if you grow it in your own garden, then it's okay. Oh, I gotta get away from these pesticides. No. It's the plant that was the problem in the first place. And they were saying this in the 80s too. We got to get rid of these pesticides. We got to get rid of them. So he sort of did a study and said, okay, well, what are we looking at here? And he found that there were 42 different poisons identified in these plants, 20 of which were shown to be carcinogenic in the lab. And obviously we've found many, many more just in the 12 years that in between when I took cancer biology and learned all this. But back in 89, they found that of those 42 chemicals, they were 10,000 times more abundant by weight than the pesticides we sprayed on these plants. Okay. So the spinach was worse than the pesticides, right? It was 10,000 times more abundant. And the naturally occurring poisons were orders of magnitude times more likely to cause cancer than the pesticides we sprayed on them. This is why we still have pesticides. This is why they weren't outlawed and banned, because they showed scientifically that the plant is worse than the pesticide. And so if you're going to eat the plant, you probably don't need to worry about the pesticide. Now, that's not to say that pesticides are good for you, especially things like Roundup and all these other sorts of things. No, they are not, but the plants aren't either. That's the whole point. And so we were quite taken aback by this, as you could imagine. And I thought that he must be joking. Everyone thought he must be joking. Everyone was just looking around, thrashing their heads around wildly, looking for a TA, like, cackling in the corner, trying to keep it together, because this was obviously a joke. It was not a joke. He was not joking. It finally dawned on us. And I remember thinking, like, okay, he's serious, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? And he, must have just read our minds, because he looked at us and just said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. So I said, right, screw plants. And I just stopped eating plants from that day on. That's why I've been doing carnivore inadvertently for about 22 years now, because I learned that plants were toxic. They don't want you to eat them. If you start eating them, they are going to make it hard on you, and they're going to make you feel like crap, and they're going to try to kill you. We know this intuitively. If you get lost in the woods, you can't just eat any random plant. Most plants will kill you, or at least make you very, very sick. Okay. So these are inedible plants, right? So why do we think that the so-called edible plants are just from the Garden of Eden and just couldn't be better for you? In fact, they're not. They're actually quite harmful as well. It's just they're not as harmful as, say, hemlock. Okay. So let's look at some of these things. There are a lot of different toxins that exist in these. These are things like cassava, which are the third most, uh, uh, as a caloric source, is the third most important caloric source in the third world. You have almonds, which contain cyanide. There are 2,500 different cyanide containing plants that we know of, and they go by crush receptors, or crush response. So they don't just exist free floating in the seed or the nut, but when they're crushed, then the cyanide is released, right? Well, what is crushing? That's something chewing and masticating that thing, and the plant goes, right, you're going to eat me, I'm going to poison you. So it releases this poison pill, and it says, I'm going to take you down with me. And you look at that pit, that's like a peach pit. When you open that up, you crack that stone open, it looks sort of like a shriveled almond. It's actually called a bitter almond. And this has enough cyanide in it that when chewed to release the cyanide, one or two of those can kill you. Okay. Almonds, it takes around a pound or two, depending on the almonds, because they have varying amounts of cyanide in them, a pound or two of almonds to get a lethal dose of cyanide. Okay. I have sat down and just, handballed half a pound of almonds from a Costco bag of these things before, while watching TV. That's potentially half a lethal dose. I'm a bigger person, so maybe it wasn't enough, it wasn't half of a lethal dose for me, but that is absolutely terrifying. We just sell this in stores where kids can get them, because like that is insane. And while you may not get dead from eating these amounts of cyanide, they can actually cause a lot of harm to your body. It can cause damage to your thyroid, damage to your brain as well. They're neurotoxic. So look at some of these in specificity. Look at hormone disruptors. There are things like called phytoestrogens. These are very commonly produced throughout the plant kingdom. Most notably in soy. About 3 ounces of soy have over 1 million nanograms of phytoestrogens in them. Put that in comparison to a fertile woman who makes about 180,000 nanograms a day, right? So it's 10 times what they would make in a day just in those 3 ounces. The birth control pill, depending on the birth control pill, would have about 35,000 nanograms of estrogen. Then they say like, oh, well, what about beef? Beef, is hormone treated, they have all these hormones in them. Right. Three ounces of lean beef that is hormone treated, given growth hormone supplementation throughout their life, has about 4 nanograms of estrogen in it. So not the same thing, not on the same scale whatsoever. There are other things that increase testosterone, but also things that block and suppress testosterone, block and suppress estrogen. Even just carbohydrates will suppress the conversion of testosterone into estrogen in women. Women don't just make estrogen, they actually make testosterone first, and then that testosterone is converted into estrogen in the ovaries. But high insulin levels will actually block that conversion. So just that high insulin is actually causing harm throughout your body. It's blocking leptin, it's blocking conversion of your hormones, it's doing a lot of damage throughout your body. So that's, again, another way that we can tell that that's not our normal biochemical state, because we're actually screwing up our biochemistry. So this is where like PCOS comes into play. When women are eating a lot of carbohydrates, some will be more sensitive than others. However, for all of them, when they're eating carbohydrates, their insulin will go up. That will block the conversion of testosterone into estrogen. And so they will necessarily have more testosterone than their body wants, and they'll have less estrogen than their body wants or needs. And so this disrupts our hormones quite significantly. And there are other factors that do that as well. Then you have nutrient blockers. These are uh, different substrates and substances that block absorption or digestion. We already talked about fiber, how that makes a physical barrier between your enzymes and the food. So it can't break down the food into amino acids in the first place, or into short chain fat, or into shorter portioned out fatty acids. And then once those things are broken down, this is a physical barrier from those nutrients getting to the border of your intestine to be drawn into the cell in the first place. So those get blocked and taken out. But more specifically, in things like multiple different things, but just looking at soy and wheat, they make a protease inhibitor. Protease is released from your pancreas to break down protein, as it sounds. Something like ASE, that means it's breaking something down. So protein breaker or downer. And then protease inhibitor stops that. Okay. So soy and wheat have protease inhibitors that block protease from breaking down our protein. Okay. This gets into bioavailability of plants as well. The protein that's available in or that exists in plants are not available necessarily. Gluten makes up 80% of the protein in wheat. Gluten cannot be used as protein. Your body cannot break it down. It cannot absorb it. It cannot use it as protein, period. And it has protease inhibitors. So what little is left of the protein in wheat that your body can actually do anything with. Now your body can't do anything with it because it's blocking the breakdown of it. But also, if you are eating meat with this very bioavailable proteins and fats, when you're eating it with wheat, like in a sandwich, where you put some croutons or something or bread chicken, well, what you're doing there is you're going to block protease from breaking down the meat as well. And so you're actually going to, again, waste nutrients, waste nutrition. And that cannot be beneficial to our survival. So that cannot be what we're supposed to eat. Soy does the same thing. Soy has protease inhibitors as well. And there are many, many others and many other examples of these nutrient blockers. Photosensitivity, this is one that not many people know about, but there are many plants that actually cause us to be much more sensitive to sunlight, and others that just increase inflammation, increase damage. So we get some damage from sun, and that increases that inflammatory response and damage. So our sunburns are worse, they hurt worse, they damage our DNA worse, and so we get worse peeling and at higher risk for skin cancers and things like that. But specifically, the things that cause you to be much more sensitive to UV light are things like limes. So there's oils in limes. And now remember, a lime is an unripe fruit. Now, the plant may or may not want you to eat that fruit. Mostly it wants other animals to eat that fruit. Most fruit will kill you. Most berries will kill you. But there are some that may not be as toxic or contain fructose, and that they generally have much less defense chemicals in them. And that's why we find fructose to be sweet, because we recognize that as safe. And so we say, okay, this can give me a quick hit of energy and that will make me survive. But fructose in and of itself will cause a lot of harm. In fact, is known to break down into alcohol and cause the same damages as alcohol, which is something that I talk about in many episodes as well. So limes being an unripe fruit, its seed is not ready to be eaten. It has defenses. It has defense chemicals. This is where green tomatoes come from. These are traditionally known to be toxic, and you don't eat them. You want them to be vine ripened. In a lime, it secretes oils on the outside that if you touch them, if you handle them, they will soak into your skin and it cause you to be very, very sensitive to sunlight. And there's actually documented cases of people getting second-degree burns just from handling limes in the sun. That actually happened to my younger brother when we were kids in Southern California. We had a lime tree and he was out there sort of picking limes and playing around. And all of a sudden he came in, he had these massive red welts and wheals all over his body. And we thought that, he must be having a sensitizing reaction, and the next time he would get anaphylaxis and he'd be dead. And so I was like, okay, keep that kid away from limes and lime trees. That wasn't the case, that he has eaten and used limes since then, and hasn't had any sort of problem. So that is really, looking back, likely what happened. There are other things that will also do the same. There's a thing called celery dermatitis, where people who handle a lot of celery, pick celery, eat a lot of celery, will get very, very sensitive to light. They'll have to wear hats and long sleeve shirts and even gloves and put sun cream on everywhere because they will just get absolutely scorched in the sun. And so this also goes into why we generally don't see too many tan vegans. A lot of them will get burned and torn up, and I do fine. I don't get burnt in the sun. You talk to any carnivore who's been doing this for a while, they're amazed. They don't get burns in the sun. You might get red. That's just blood going to the skin, but that just turns into a tan later. You're not really going to peel or damage your skin unless you really overdo it. And again, we talked about the cyanogenic properties of different plants. And again, there's 2,500 different plants that use cyanide as a defense. And so this is very clearly designed to stop animals from eating them because it has that crush effect. They only release the cyanide when they are crushed. Okay. And you have nightshades. These are potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers. These have been known for thousands of years to be just an entire class of plant that you just don't go near. The Europeans in going back millennia knew that you don't touch nightshades, and they could tell when they went to the New World. They said, "Oh, yeah, these are nightshades. Don't eat them." They brought them back as curiosities. What a strange looking plant! Look at what we brought back from this strange new land, and it was seen that some of the natives were eating these things, but they were doing it in very specific ways. They were taking the tomatoes, they were blanching them, they were taking the peel off, they were taking the seeds out, they were only eating the pulp. And that's actually what traditional tomato sauces were made out of, was just that pulp of vine ripened tomatoes. They would peel the skin of a potato. Up until very recently, it's only been within my lifetime that people said, no, 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 you don't want to peel these plants and these vegetables. That's where all the nutrients are. That's where all the vitamins are. Yeah, okay. It's also where all the poison is. That's their barrier protection that stops insects from eating into them and eating this part of the plant that they don't want eaten. Okay. And gluten, again, this is a protein, but it is not possible to use as protein. But it also causes a lot of harm. It actually causes leaky gut, which is the breakdown of those tight junctions in between your or intestinal cells and the intestinal wall. And this allows chemicals such as lectins and other things, even bacteria, getting into your system and getting into your body when normally they would not do that. They would stay out by that barrier protection, just like your skin stops, bugs and weird things from getting into your body. Your gut lining does the same thing. So really, the lumen of your intestine, that's the outside world. Really, your body's not letting that in unless you're eating things like gluten, and that breaks down that barrier protection. So now these things can get into your body and cause harm. This is where lectins come in. Lectins, there's a whole book written about this in 2019 by Dr. Gundry, who showed just how harmful lectins are. Things like kidney beans, which are very normal things to eat. When you don't process them properly, when you don't soak them in water and then boil them for at least 10 minutes, those lectins can make you very sick, very, very sick. And even then, they're not perfectly done away with. They're not perfectly disabled. They still cause harm in your body. And of course, heat treatment isn't going to take care of all the plant toxins out there. But lectins specifically will get into your body through these tight junctions. They've actually been indicated to be a causative factor in autoimmune issues because the body makes antibodies towards these lectins because these are foreign molecules. Your body does not want them in your body. And so it fights them, makes these antibodies to go out and attack these things. Well, there's something called molecular mimicry where some protein or something on one of your cells may be similar enough to one of these lectins or a bacteria or a virus that your body's fighting off that these antibodies stick to them because they don't have a mind of their own. They're just acting chemically. And if they can bind to something chemically, they will bind to that something chemically. It's just a chemical reaction. And so by molecular mimicry, all of a sudden your body has started attacking your own body. That's an autoimmune disease. Okay. So an autoimmune, your body is attacking itself, but it's not attacking itself. It's attacking these lectins. And when you remove those lectins from your diet, your body stops making antibodies towards those lectins. And then there's no spillover effect from those antibodies to your body. And this is why nearly every single autoimmune disease that I've ever seen when on a carnivore diet will significantly improve, if not completely resolve, within a few months. I have yet to see someone with Crohn's or ulcerative colitis go on a carnivore diet, pure meat and water diet, usually red meat and water diet, and not completely reverse their disease within 3 months on biopsy. So when these guys get biopsied at 3 months, there's no sign of disease. I have yet to see a single case that didn't happen. Rheumatoid arthritis as well, that just goes away. And then people will get much better within the first few weeks as well. And then even, on biopsy, they'll find that there's no sign of disease after a few months. Hashimoto's takes a little bit longer. I usually see that take about, 9 months to a year, or maybe just still lingering on a little bit. But again, it significantly improves, and we've had, again, with Dr. Salisbury, he was showing that you could reverse rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, and ulcerative colitis back in the 1800s by putting people on a pure red meat and water diet. This was something that was well known and documented in the medical peer-reviewed medical literature going back to the 1800s, and yet no one knows about it. Why is that? And then there are other things that'll just kill you straight out. We talk about the inedible plants like North American water hemlock. This blocks the GABA receptors in your brain that basically calm down your brain cells. When your brain cells get too stimulated and overstimulated and out of control, they all start firing at once, and this is called a seizure. Okay, they can be quite dangerous. They actually damage your brain directly. They can make you fall over and crack your head. If you don't stop having a seizure, you can die, or you will die if you don't stop. Hemlock blocks the GABA receptor. So all the medications that we use to stop seizures, they basically all work on that GABA receptor. And so this is blocking that. And so it doesn't matter how much medication and drugs you give these people, they're going to die of seizures within 1 to 2 minutes. And you're never going to get to them fast enough to stop it anyway, even if it does have some effect. So this is a very well-developed, cataloged and described phenomenon in botany, going back thousands of years, that plants use harmful chemicals to stop animals and insects from eating them. Okay, so, in summary, this really shows that we are obligate carnivores, okay, with one optimal diet. All right. So we are obligated to eat meat. We cannot thrive and survive on anything else. Okay. So while we can survive eating other things, we're not going to thrive. It's not going to be optimal for us. I know some people say that, well, everyone's different, and maybe one person does better with an omnivore diet, maybe someone does better with a vegetarian diet, maybe someone does better with a meat-based diet. Everyone's different. That is nonsense. That is someone who has not thought about this for literally 1 second. Okay, and when I hear doctors say this sort of thing, I really, really get a bit miffed, because these are people that are supposedly biologists, but I guess everyone forgot their biology lesson, and forgot to actually just look out in nature. And anytime someone says this, I've asked doctors this, I've asked other people this that have made this ridiculous comment. I said, name one example of two members of the same species who have different optimal diets. Okay. It does not exist. People say, well, is this good for women as well as men? What about during pregnancy? What about kids? The answer is just yes. It doesn't matter what condition you are, what stage of life you are, whatever. We are humans. We are Homo sapiens sapiens. Okay. If we had a different optimal diet between two people, those two people would be different species of people. and yet they're not. We don't have different species of people anymore. We don't even have Homo neanderthalis anymore. We just have Homo sapiens, and Neanderthals were carnivore as well. So you have to be actually quite divergent. You can't even be a close relative and have a very different diet. All right. So, biologically, anatomically, evolutionarily, anthropologically, metabolically, we can show that humans are carnivores. That is just the kind of animal that we are, and that eating meat is our optimal diet. And for no less reason than plants use defense chemicals because they don't want to die. And if it's you or them, they will make sure it's you, okay? Because it's kill or be killed out in the wild, even for plants as well as animals. And